Yeah, there's like two turns, like an S curve.
Good morning, this is Jeff with Sewer Tech Northwest. We are at 21605 Southeast Oak Street here in Gresham, located to the left of the front doorway, going into a 4-inch ABS cleanout. We're coming into your post-jetting. Jet's been down the line, looks like once or twice already. Somewhere in here, and it's possible we've already picked up. When I drop into this cleanout here, it's hard to tell where the actual sewer line Y is in because it is underwater. My assumption is it's probably somewhere here, almost immediately into the line. So we're going to zero out here. Off we go. Now we're going to get some water. Okay, so right here is actually where we tie into the true sewer line. That first little bit of pipe there is just mostly in a very awkwardly designed cleanout. The line looks like it actually comes out somewhere around the doorway, and I think in an effort to keep the cleanout out of the way of the door, they did this funky undercut design. So this is actually where the sewer line is here, so we're going to zero out here. And hope and pray we can get through this thing. Transitioning here to 6-inch concrete pipe. There's the main there at about 69, 70 feet. I'm going to locate really quick here and then we'll let the line drain and pull back, take a look. Okay, just located the camera head right at the end of the driveway. Main lateral is just barely into the street by maybe 2 feet. Almost the entire sewer line is on property, just about. We're going to start reeling back in here. Line is fully drained, or just about. There's a little bit of water still trickling through. So that's some of the rust scale that's been blasted out. This line has got some extremely difficult turns to maneuver. At least the rust scale is getting blasted out into the concrete. And the concrete pipe here has actually fared very nicely. The stuff drains beautifully. It's in good shape for its age. The cast iron, surprisingly, has not fared anywhere near as good as the concrete has. So you've got some very heavy scale and slag in here. This is one of those lines that after running a jet through it, I mean, you can continuously jet it. Anyway, sorry, I had to pause there. Kind of lost my train of thought there for a second. But there's very heavy rust scaling in here. The cast iron at this point, you know, you can certainly get it descaled. The hard part is the level of turns that are in the sewer line. This is an extremely difficult line to actually service end to end, especially because the way this clean out is set up at the very beginning, it hinders everything that goes in here. It doesn't look like the last guy was able to get their camera to the main, and the jetter is not able to pass one of those last turns there in the cast iron pipe. I think a lot of everyone else kind of zeroed or assumed this clean out was the start of the line, so a lot of people are getting out to around 60, 63 feet based on the foot counter. In reality, it's right here. This is the turn that's stopping everyone about 51 feet into the line. That's zeroing out from the actual sewer clean out, the true clean out itself, not from this initial plastic one. That turn right there is just the one that kills everybody getting through. I think jetting this thing certainly improved the flow line. That may have what allowed me to get further. But in an ideal scenario, you have a different clean-out axis in this so that you can thoroughly jet this thing out. You can get a good portion of it. The hard part is if you can't run that jet through the entire line, it's hard to blast every bit of rust out of it. And so what you can end up with are piles of rust sitting down line somewhere. And granted, a portion of those will flush out naturally on their own. It's just hard to say how easily that'll occur. But back in here, we're actually looking pretty good. The top of the pipe looks half decent. We got a lot of the scale off the flow line. You got a couple little stringy items there just off of the left side of the pipe, on the left side of the screen, which have the ability or possibility of being small root hairs. It's so small, though, it's hard to discern if that's what that actually is or not. There are other things that can get stuck, especially in rough cast iron, that very much mimic the look of tiny roots. String, dental floss, all kinds of junk, especially if it's sat in the line for an eon, getting gunked over. Alright, so I located this spot here. We're right on the edge of the driveway, near the top of the driveway on the left side edge, about 4.5 feet deep. There's no pipe joint here, and cast iron, typically speaking, is quite a strong pipe material. That's not to say that these couldn't potentially be roots that have gone through the sidewall of the pipe. The sidewall doesn't look quite that level of deteriorated to be able to allow roots that tiny through. So that's a hard one right there. I'd have to go back and review the other video to see if there's any other signs of this here that you know, the jetter may have minimized by going through it. At 4.5 feet deep, I mean, the only thing next to this is a tiny little shrub. It's a hard one. But to completely jet this thing thoroughly, really descale it properly, realistically, you're going to need a different access point. That's the biggest hindrance on this line, is just how you gain access to it. It's too awkward. And depending on what the price point is to install that clean out, that's where you really want to start heavily looking at the prospect of, does it make sense to spend that kind of money installing a clean out so you can thoroughly clean this thing, or does it make more sense just to simply do something like an epoxy liner on it and call it a day and line the entire thing? You know, the line here looks better than I thought it was going to. If you could get that jetter to run through the entirety of this line, I think most of it is going to look like this. And this right here, if I were just showing up here, not, you know, knowing that a jetter had just gone through or anything, this is some decent looking cast iron right now. It's not perfect, it's showing some wear and tear on it, but it's, you know, once you get all that rust scale out of there, it's got decent flow to it. So, I mean, ideally, what you end up with, I'll do a locator too, and I'll consult with the jet guy here on where the best position would be to put that clean out, to best clean this thing out, and I'll put some locates in those areas, but that's about the only way you're going to be able to thoroughly clean this thing out and jet it entirely. Alright, I'm going to push back out here for just a moment. Anyway, this spot here at 24 feet is a really hard one. It could indeed be the start of a root intrusion. It could also be debris. I mean, you've seen how rough that scale is. I mean, if you get certain types of debris in a line, they can really effectively mimic the look of roots. Those do have the appearance of roots. I've been doing this 13 years. I've cambered thousands and thousands of them. They have the appearance of small roots. Just typically speaking, it's very uncommon for root. Cast iron is it resists root intrusions very effectively. So it's even more unlikely that you're going to get roots plowing through the sidewall of the pipe where there's no pipe joint at all. The cast iron flow line area just does not look quite deteriorated to the point where that is possible, but nothing's impossible. And sometimes when you get these rust nodules like this, sometimes they are, if you've ever been in a basement and seen the cast iron stack coming out of a ceiling going down into the floor, you get those rust drip marks. Those are pinholes that form in cast iron. And then the rust builds up over the top of them and eventually kind of creates a scab layer that often stops the leak. But if you get small pinholes like that, it's feasible that roots could get through them. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find a spot here that's reasonable. Because I think if you get to the point here where you've got to put a clean out into the concrete and actually cut the driveway open, to me at that point, you might as well just do an epoxy liner on this thing and fully update it. That's my 2 cents on it, if you're going to that level of effort. The drain cleaner I'm talking to over here, he's been doing this stuff a long time. He's fairly confident if we could get a clean out access kind of near the top left-hand corner of the driveway, that should be bypassing enough turns, especially these awkward ones at the beginning, to advance the machine out to the very end of the sewer line. I mean, if I can get it out to the main at this point with just a camera, I would imagine a height. There's no guarantees, but bypassing these first 2 really awkward turns, you've got basically back-to-back 90s. That should be enough mitigation of turns in order to advance the machine all the way out and fully jet the line out. What I'm trying to do here is find this location and see if these little possible roots are in a location where you could also add a clean out in. You know, rust like this stuff, you know, there's still some of this stuff left behind. This stuff isn't so bad. A lot of that's going to clear out with just natural water flow, especially if my camera's spreading it out like this. Alright, I got a bunch more water going down line just to help clear some of that rust out there. I'm going to do a couple markings near the top left-hand corner of the driveway here. I'm getting about 4 foot 2 inches deep. This is right as the line is I'm just barely before the edge of the driveway. Right before the line goes under it. I apologize for the back and forth here. I'm trying to hunt that spot back down again where we had those little stringy things on the sidewall of the pipe that had the potential to be roots. Now that I sat there while the camera was paused with the water running full bore, just running the camera back and forth to help break that junk up. and it actually cleared out of there quite effectively. In the process of doing that, it looks like that the rust bits going to the line may have very well removed whatever that was from the sidewall. And if that's the case, I mean, even small roots are very strong. Generally speaking, a camera just going past them like that is very rarely enough to rip them loose. Yeah, I'm not actually seeing a whole lot here right now. I think that may be what happened. I think whatever that was loose, because I'm not seeing it. When I go back to 24 feet now, I'm not seeing anything sitting there. Alright, that's the last pass I'm going to take at this thing. I just ran a bunch more water, ran the camera back and forth a bunch of times. And I was able to push some of that junk at least out into the concrete, which is a much larger diameter pipe. And it's also a good distance from the house. If you're going to have rust scale on the line, that's where you want to be at. Right now, it's just much less likely to lead to a flow problem. I just didn't want to have any piles left over, but you can see how you've still got some fairly jagged rust out here at this part of the line. You know, and this stuff, you're not going to be able to jet free or clear it out without having a different access point. I've done what I can there in combination with the jet within reason. I'm just at a point where I can't keep... My camera is not a drain cleaning machine, and this is right here is where a lot of everyone else is stopping. Especially the jet. The jet, once it's pressurized, is a very rigid, stiff hose, and it has a hard time. Once you start getting through that many different turns, you need to have a different access point, or what you're going to end up doing is destroying your jetter hose. And that's what you don't want to have happen, especially if one catastrophically fails. You don't want a jet hose getting busted off inside your line. So, I mean, that's my 2 cents on that. I mean, if you want to get all that junk out of there and get it as smooth as it is back in this part of the line, you're going to need a different access point. Okay, I can still see one tiny little hair there. The rest of them, there's not as many there now. That or it caused them to clump together. I don't really know. There's so little there right now, it's hard to even discern if those are roots. I'm calling them possible roots. It's so easy to lose track of these darn things. They're so tiny. Anyway, about right here, I'm worried though this is starting to get into the driveway at this point. It's very close to the edge. If you're going to put a clean out in, this might be an ideal location to do it. Just from the standpoint of it, you might be correcting a root intrusion, you might not be, at the same time as installing a cleanout. Yeah, so you'll see a green arrow that's kind of angling toward the left side edge of the driveway. That's as you stand in the street facing the house. Where you get to that point right there, these locators are very accurate. I don't trust them to, mere inches in a lot of cases. It's possible you may be able to partially tunnel under the driveway without having to mess with the concrete. But you're about, I'm getting between 4'2" and 4'7" inches deep there. Ideally you put the clean out in somewhere around that location. If you can, potentially kill 2 birds with 1 stone, that's always ideal. But what's there is so small, I can't confirm with 100% certainty those are actually roots. They do appear to be roots, or have the appearance of them, I should say. But anything that gets hung up in a line like this, and this standing wire at the start of the line is a non-issue. This is not even a functional part of the sewer line here. This is just clean out access. What you do have, though, is a line that has good slope and grade to it, by and large. You might have a little bit of standing water at the very end of the cast iron right before it transitions, but you've also got a fair amount of rust still sitting there too. It could easily be damming the pipe up. So anyway, right over here, off to the left side edge of the driveway, sorry I can't get my camera lens clear enough, you've got some little tiny shrubs right there. There's about 3 in a row right on the side of the driveway, between the 2 larger sets of bushes there. Right in that location is where that arrow marking is at. You know, to clean this thing more thoroughly, you're going to need a different clean out access, and that's where, you know, it would be a good spot to put one. It bypasses some turns, and again, if you dig that far enough and at least get under the driveway a little ways, you may very well fix a root intrusion. Here's the thing though, if you're not updating an entire sewer line, and those are indeed roots there and not some other type of debris, what you're doing by installing a new piece of clean out, or ABS plastic in there is usually what's used, what you're going to have transition joints, and if those are indeed roots in that location, what you are going to definitely run the risk of at that point is a root penetrating through a transition joint, or especially when you have old and new materials meeting together. Those transition joints are by far the weakest joints in your line to root intrusions. And so what you may end up doing, you may be going from a very small, minor root intrusion right now. It's hard to say, they're so small. What you could end up with is a re-intrusion by roots through a transition joint, which is a heck of a lot easier for roots to pound through than it is through the sidewall of cast iron. So that's the other thing that concerns me about doing this, is you might be getting things dealt with in the immediate, but you could potentially create another issue down the road. Once that has sat in the ground for a little while, you might have some roots trying to weasel their way back through. Now you're going to have 2 transition joints in that location, whereas right now you've got a solid pipe wall, at least one that looks by and large solid. Right now it's hard to tell if those are even roots, but they do indeed have the appearance of them. They're just so darn small, it's hard to discern. So right now, as it sits, I would say you have adequate flow to the main lateral. It's not ideal, it's not where I'd like it to be. Ideally, you get that rust blown out of the end of the cast iron and blast out of the concrete. You know, but getting out of the cast iron portion of the line is the biggest beast here. Once it's into the concrete, as long as it's spread out, not in big piles, it's not as concerning. But you know, this is a hard one, because once you jet the thing out thoroughly, you're going to have a cast iron line here that's fairly smooth and has good flow to it. It's just hard to know what it's going to turn into down the road, especially being where you have the potential for a small root intrusion. That's what's tricky, just knowing the longevity on this thing. So otherwise, I think your other option here, I wouldn't necessarily mess around with digging anything up. I would be doing an epoxy liner on this. This looks like it would be a great candidate for it. But again, you're going to have to probably put a 2-way clean out in a different location in order to do that. What you've got right now would not suffice in order to install a liner on this thing if you wanted to go that route. And that's what I would be doing on this one. It goes under enough driveway and awkward stuff that if you can avoid digging the whole entire thing up, that would be ideal. But as we sit here right now, the line is functioning. It is draining slower than it should due to you've got still some rust there at the end of the cast iron that has the potential to snag things up. Some of that may very well clear out on its own, but it's hard to say what it'll do.